Started, Chair.
Good morning, councillors, officers, members of the public and press. Welcome to this meeting of the Finance and Policy Committee. This meeting is a remote one and it is being live streamed and recorded as well. I'll now hand over to the Democratic Services team for a roll call.
Good morning, members. Good morning, everyone. If I'll start the meeting by way of a roll call, I'll start initially with the Finance and Policy Committee members. If members could please indicate that they have a copy of this morning's agenda and also can see and be heard on the screen as well, please. Councillor Christopher Akers-Belcher.
Yes to all.
Thank you. Councillor Brewer.
Hello, yes to everything.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Morning, yes to everything.
Councillor Lindridge.
Morning, papers and I can see in here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Little.
Yes to all.
Councillor Marshall.
Yes to all.
Councillor Moore.
Yes to all.
Councillor Smith.
Yes to all.
Thank you. Councillor Tennant.
Yes, I have all the paperwork.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Yes to all.
Councillor Young.
Yes to all.
Okay, I'll move on to the other policy committee members invited this morning. Councillor Stephen Akers-Belcher. No. Yeah. Councillor Cassidy.
Yes to all.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton. No. Councillor Harrison.
Yes, good morning. Thank you.
Councillor Howson.
Yes to all.
Thank you. Councillor James.
I can see and hear, and I do believe that I've got all the papers.
Thank you. Councillor Lauderdale. No. Councillor Loynes. No. Councillor Prince.
Yes to everything, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carl Richardson.
Yes, I have everything, thank you.
Councillor Ward. No. I also believe we have online Councillor T. Richardson.
Yes.
You. And also Councillor Buchan.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors I haven't called during the roll call, please? No? Okay, thank you. Just to remind members during the meeting, if they could have their microphones on mute, please, to reduce the background noise. And just to remind members that in relation to voting, as in all remote meetings and in the amended council procedure rules, any agenda items that require a vote, a recorded vote will be taken, and that vote will be done by roll call with elected members requesting to indicate their votes for, against, or abstentions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Moving on to apologies for absence. Have we received any?
Not from the membership of the committee, Chair.
Thank you very much. And agenda item 2, declarations of interests.
Yeah, I've got an interest. I'm a foster parent.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Richardson. Okay, doesn't look like there's anybody else then. Councillor Richardson, if you could just lower your hand as well. Thank you. So the minutes then, we have 2 sets of minutes. We have the minutes from the meeting of Finance and Policy Committee held on the 30th of November 2020. Are there any questions or comments on those minutes? And if not, can we take them as a true record? See no issue, no dissent there, so we'll take those as okay. And then to receive the minutes of the Health and Wellbeing Board held on the 7th of September 2020. Again, any questions or comments on those, or can we take them as agreed? Okay, so no dissent again. Thank you. We'll move straight on to the first main agenda item, and that's the medium-term financial strategy for 21-22 and 22-23 from the Director of Resources and Development.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. I think this is a comprehensive report, and I'm going to try and just focus on the key issues in the report. Obviously happy to take any questions from members. We've set out in section 3 the background to the report, and I'll talk about the spending review as well. I think in the context of looking forward to next year's budget and in the years beyond, we do need to look back on the period of austerity that was managed up to the financial year 2019-20. Effectively, the Council had faced 9 years of reductions in government funding over that period. And also that period was typified by a change in government policy that increased reliance on funding for local services onto council tax, and that included in 2016-17 the implementation of the adult social care precept. And you know, those issues coupled together have been a significant change in how the sector's funded. The council faced, as I say, significant reductions in funding, and to address those deficits, the council has made lots of efficiencies and service cuts in the past. And I think one of the things that sticks in my mind is the scale of the jobs that have been removed. So between 2010-11 and 2019-20, the council had to remove 500 jobs, which was effectively 1 in 5 posts. So a much smaller workforce than you had previously. In section 3.4, we're going to talk about the spending review. Excuse me. I think it's important that members have the context of the country's finances. If you watch the news, you'll have picked some of this information up in terms of the scale of the government borrowing to support the economy through the pandemic, and that support that's gone to businesses, to individuals through the furloughing scheme, also support to councils. As a result, the government are going to borrow something in the region of £394 billion in the current year, and that's the highest level of peacetime borrowing ever. I think to give that figure some context, because I think it's so enormous, it's 3 times the NHS's annual budget, or another way, it's twice the amount of income that the country raises from income tax. So a significant level of borrowing, which will have implications for the public sector for years to come. And obviously that's an issue for the government to address. The spending review has an impact on local government. We've only been advised by government that the spending review is for 1 year only, which isn't helpful. It defers all the financial uncertainty to 22-23, and obviously, as I say, that makes planning difficult. In terms of the local government settlement, the provisional settlement was issued on the 17th of December, as set out in section 4 of the report. The headline announcement was a large increase in core spending power for councils, but as set out on page 4 of the report, an analysis of those figures shows that most of that increase in cash spending that the government have announced is actually predicated on the government's assumption that councils will increase council tax and increase the adult social care precept up to the levels that the government have set. And I've included a chart on page 4 that reflects information the Institute of Fiscal Studies have provided, which shows that 87% of that cash increase in funding for local government is based on the government's assumption that council tax and the social care precept will be increased. And obviously only 13% comes from an increase in government grant. And that really effectively reflects the government's policies in relation to those issues. If I turn members to page 6 of the report, and that talks and looks at social care. We had hoped that we'd get more funding for social care next year. There is an extra 300 million for local government. That's a lot less than they provided this year. We'd hope that repeat and given an additional £1 billion. Effectively, they're going to do so, but they expect that 700 million of that will come from the adult social care precept. So not a grant increase of £1 billion for social care, but a partial increase from grant of 300 million and an assumption that councils could raise 700 million from the adult social care precept. And you can see from the comments I started with, that's the government's policy of continuing to push the burden onto local government and onto council taxpayers. And that point is really summarised at the bottom of page 7, where we set out the government's proposed council tax referendum limits. They are a core limit of 2% for next year and an additional 3% social care precept flexibility. The core limit is year specific, so it's either used in 21-22 or it's gone forever, and that's just the rules that government has set. Whereas the adult social care precept has some flexibility that either all or part of it can be used in 21-22, and any element that isn't used can be deferred till 22-23. So there is a degree of flexibility around how the adult social care precept is used. I think over the page, Chair, on page 8, we've given some information in relation to additional COVID grant funding that the government are providing for local government. This is effectively a fifth tranche of funding they've provided so far. It's 1.55 billion. Hartlepool will receive 3.78 million. In the report, we've set out the government's indications of where they think that funding will need to be used. So it's across adult social care, children's social care, public health, etc. At the moment, the report recommends that we don't commit that money because we don't know what additional pressures there will be in relation to those services. Since the report was prepared, chief execs and directors of adult social care have received a letter from the Department of Health and Social Care that makes the points, that letter was dated the 21st of January. I think it makes the points that the government expect that there will be significant pressures in relation to social care from a range of issues that will affect the sector. So there'll be implications on capacity. I think regrettably, because of how the pandemic's hit the sector, that there's going to be effectively less people in care in the care sector for a period. That has huge economic implications for those businesses. They are facing huge increases in insurance costs, and they may continue to face pressure on their workforce. In the current year, the government have largely funded those costs themselves. The money's come via councils on top of the funding we've received. It's clear from the letter in January that they expect those costs to be picked up by councils, and I would suspect that letter will end up with the care providers, and they will come knocking on the council's door. So that's an update. There was a further update on Friday, late on, an email from MHCLG officials. We have to complete monthly returns on the current COVID funding. What they now are asking for is our forecasts for the first 3 months of the new financial year. So obviously the continuing to ramp up the scrutiny on how we spend that funding and accountability. And I think those points underline the recommendation that we need to be careful in committing that spend, and it does look like there'll be extra pressures and demands on the authority's budget. On page 9 of the report, Chair, we've provided a summary of the budget deficit and the update from the previous forecasts to reflect the change in circumstances. We've effectively split it into 2 parts, a recurring deficit of approximately £4 million, and also the impact that we think income of the council next year will be continued to be affected by the pandemic. So, as people aren't out and about, they're not using services that the council provides. Our leisure centre's still closed, for example. So we think those impacts will continue into next year, and we've made an estimate of 1.1 million. So overall, we face a deficit of 5.2 million that needs to be addressed next year. If I turn members back to council tax and paragraph 4.4 of the report, obviously I'm repeating the points a little bit, but it is key that the issues in relation to council tax and the social care precept are the government's policy for funding local services, but that just passes the decision to yourselves to make locally. In financial terms, clearly members will appreciate that if you increase council tax and the social care precept up to the government's limits, that provides the most resilient financial position for the authority. It secures the highest recurring resources. It reduces the budget deficit that's deferred from 21-22 to 22-23 financial years, and it obviously leaves more of the budget support fund uncommitted to support 22-23. Conversely, At the other end of the spectrum, if there was a council tax freeze and no social care precept, that reduces recurring income, certainly for 21-22 by 2.1 million. There is, as I've already indicated, the opportunity that part of that income, so the adult social care precept, could be secured in 22-23, which would recover effectively 1.2 million of that 2.1. This option would defer a larger deficit and uses more of the budget support fund. And over the page, on page 12, there is a table that sets out the impact of different options from 0.0 to 2% core increase and 3% social care precept. Option 3 and 4 in that table highlight the same financial outcome, but it's achieved through a different combination. So option 3 would be a core increase of 2% and a 1% social care precept. And that obviously leaves the flexibility of 2% social care precept deferred till the following year. Option 4 would give the same financial outcome this year, but would have been all social care precept used of the 3% and nothing deferred. And that table's there for members' information, and it's something I'll come back to later on the report in the conclusions. In relation to the other important issues, if I refer members to paragraph 4.16, and that's council collection fund deficits. I previously advised members that because of the pandemic and the increase in unemployment, regrettably for all those affected, there is an increase in households that are eligible for local council tax support. That reduces the council's income. That impact's hitting us in the current year, but we don't have to take it into account till we set the 21-22 budget. Normally, we would have to pick that deficit up in 1 year. The government are allowing authorities to spread it over 3 years. They're also going to provide an element of compensation towards part of that deficit. The headline policy announcement states it's 75% of the deficit. When you get into the small print, it's 75% of an element of the deficit that we're forecasting. And it's a tight definition. So we expect that we'll receive one-off funding of 729,000 towards a deficit of 2.06 million that we currently forecast. Fortunately, we can meet the shortfall of about 1.3 million from the overall government funding we're receiving from COVID. The position in relation to business rates is similar. We're still working through the implications. The government scheme has only recently been finalised. The 75% looks like it's more like what it says on the tin. It's 75% of the whole deficit, not just a specific part. The remaining 25%, again, we'll cover off from the COVID grant. I flagged in the report that there are more risks around business rates. At the moment, there's an awful lot of information and appeals being submitted to the Valuation Office. They clearly have a backlog of work, so we don't know what the impact will be on Hartlepool, and it is very difficult to assess. So there is a risk that when those issues work their way through, which I suspect won't be until next financial year, there's potential impacts there, and it's not clear yet how the government will deal with that. And I suppose it'll all depend on how it impacts across the country in its entirety. In section 5, we set out funding that the government are providing in relation to the impact of COVID on ongoing council tax income. We will have a lower council tax base next year than the current year because there'll be more LCTS households. So we've got some government grants to help mitigate that. The balance of that grant is potentially available to support LCTS households, and a range of options are set out in the report, Chair, and there's a table before paragraph 5.9 that sets out the 3 options and the financial implications of those options for members' consideration. In terms of moving to the 22-23 position, and that's set out in section 6 of the report. And I think, as I've already said, it's difficult to forecast. I think what's clear is that the next spending review isn't going to see lots of funding coming to local government. I think the government's priorities are the NHS, defence and education. I think there's something like 60% of government spend. So the other 40% of the government spending is probably going to find a tougher period. For planning purposes, I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that we'll get a cash freeze in government funding, but obviously there's a risk to that. The table at the top of page 19 effectively picks up effectively what the deficit will be that's forecast for 22-23. So it's about £1.5 million, plus the element of deficit that will be deferred from the current year, depending on the decisions members make in relation to council tax and social care precept. And again, you can see across that table, if it's a 0 and 0 in 21-22 for council tax and social care, you are facing a 5.6 million forecast deficit for 22-23. If you were at the far end and went to the government's limit of 2% for core and 3% social care, it will be a 3.4 million deficit that needed to be addressed in that year. Section 7 deals with reserves. It concentrates on what we call other reserves, and there's a table at paragraph 7.6 that provides a breakdown of those reserves, and the table shows that those reserves have reduced very significantly over 3 years, from just under 31 million at March 2018 to 21 million in March 2020. And the supplementary information we've sent out shows further reductions over the coming years. And obviously, some of those figures will change depending on the decisions members make today. What we've concentrated in the report on page 21 is the Budget Support Fund. That is effectively the reserve we've got available to support the budget next year and beyond. And there are effectively 3 components to that. There was the existing Budget Support Fund of just over 3 million. A reserve called Strategic One-Off Cost Reserve that can be put in there as well, of 2.599 million, and then the release of capital funding of 3 million. That gives us a budget support fund of 8.6 million. Over the page, on page 22, we've set out the impact of the different options to support the 21-22 budget from reserves linked to the different council tax, social care precepts. And you can see the range of uncommitted budget support fund on that table ranges from 3.4 million, should I say, to 5.5 or 5.6 million. And obviously, with the uncertainty, the greater that reserve is that's carried forward, the more robust the budget is for future years. And at paragraph 7.10, we outline the sorts of risks that the authority has to fund from that. So it's potential to support the budget in 22-23. It's the potential risks in relation to the fair funding review and business rates reform. It's the risks of high business rates, impacts from moving to 50% to 75%. And obviously we have this potential recurring risk in relation to the cost of children's social care, which is obviously a very important issue for the council. They're probably the key revenue aspects of the report. There are a range of capital issues set out in section 8. I think they're self-explanatory. I'll not go through them in detail, but I'll be obviously happy to go back and take any questions that members may have on those points. I think in terms of conclusions and bringing the report to an end, I've set out conclusions and robustness advice in section 11. I suppose I'll start to finish by where we started. The report is we have had to deal with austerity previously for 9 years. It has been very difficult. The authorities made some significant cuts in services, etc. So going forward, it will get more difficult and significantly more difficult. Legally, in accordance with the Local Government Act 2003, I'm required as your Section 151 officer to give advice on the robustness of the budget and the level of reserves. And paragraph 11.5 it provides clarity in relation to that issue. My institute issued further guidance to sort of assist that, and that's effectively what's reflected in this section. In section 11.7, I highlight, and I think you've picked this up, the most important issue for members is the impact of the government's referendum limits. And I would stress the government's referendum limits around the core increase and the social care precept. they do have a significant bearing on the robustness advice, because obviously they're the only opportunity we've got that the government effectively sanctioning to increase recurring income. And clearly, as I've already indicated, the most robust option would be to implement increases in line with the government's limits. After that, implementing, say, a core increase of 2% plus an element of the social care precept in 21-22, with the ability to defer the unused social care precept of 22-23 as set out in paragraph 11.10 would be the next most sustainable option. 11.11, the third most sustainable option for next year certainly is to implement the full 3% adult social care precept if there was no increase in core council tax increase. But as I point out in 11.11, that does reduce recurring income effectively by 854,000 compared to the previous two options. I think a bit of advice that I do need to give members is, my professional view is set out in 11.12, that the proposal not to increase council tax and the social care precept, I don't think it is effectively a robust decision, because it's going to require the authority to make more difficult decisions in future years around how either is the delayed adult social care precept implemented in a future year, or how does the authority, if that's not the case, effectively offset the reduction in recurring income of 2.1 million and effectively then address a deficit of 5.6 million in 22-23. I'm obviously, as members appreciate from previous years, I'm required to give that advice, and then members have to make a decision on the basis of the information before them in terms of what they wish to do and what they wish to recommend to full council. At that point, Chair, I think I've probably covered the key issues in the report. I have noticed a few hands have gone up, and then obviously it's over to yourself to work through the recommendations.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Chris. It is a very detailed report, and I thank you for everything that you've put in this year. It has been appreciated, and I know it hasn't been easy. Again, I thank you for your professional advice that it is contained within the report as well, and it is obviously noted. Thank you. I think members will remember earlier on in this municipal year, we took the decision to take a pause effectively this year and try and support some of the budget using reserves. And the reason for doing that was that we didn't know what the landscape was going to look like next year, especially as we come out of this pandemic. And that was an approach that was agreed by all members, and it's one that we've worked towards so far. I think for me, and I've spoken to many of my colleagues on this, and whilst it does go against the professional advice as set out with Chris, the general consensus is that people do need a little bit of breathing space this year as well. And if there is the option to defer decisions until a later date and give us more time to lead in, to look at what the landscape looks like next year, then it's one we should certainly be looking at this time around. Therefore, it would be my suggestion that as a committee, we put a proposal to full council to freeze core council tax and to freeze adult social care precept this year, and move any discussion on that for next year, so that we can look over the coming year at exactly what we can and cannot do.
Chair, I will second that.
Who is that, sorry?
Councillor Tennant.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tennant. I have a number of other people with their hands up. I've got Councillor Young.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you said, it's really difficult circumstances. We're still in the grip of a pandemic, and I think to add further burden to the population of the town is unfair. And I made a statement at the weekend on social media to that effect. One of the things that I noticed in the report, and again, thanks to Chris for putting that report together, and it is robust advice, and it's sad that we're at this point where we can't necessarily take it from our perspective. But one of the things I noticed in the report was the local council tax support scheme had an additional recommended amount and an additional grant given. And maybe the fairest thing, as our scheme is the highest at 12% in the Tees Valley, maybe the fairest thing is to spread that out a little bit, and instead of taking the additional options that Chris has put in the report, use that nearly £1 million to go towards the council tax, the total council tax freeze that we're looking at this morning. That might be a solution in its own right. But yeah, I'm happy with what you've said, Chair, and I will be voting for a total freeze on council tax.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I saw Chris, your hand came up there. Did you want to come back in on one of these points, or did you want to speak at the end?
So that can come in on that point, because it might be helpful for members in terms of what Councillor Young's suggested. I think all members, I'd refer them to the information that came out after the agenda on the 21st. I think it's got 4.1 on the top, medium-term financial strategy, additional information, and then a section on the local council tax support scheme. What we've provided in there is a comparison of our current understanding of the position in the Tees Valley. As you're already aware, for many years, your 12% scheme has been the best in the Tees Valley. There are 3 at 20%. So obviously, it's people are paying a lot more, and 1 at 17.5. There is only one other authority proposing at the moment to provide some one-off support for their LCTS claimants, and they have a current 20% scheme. And that authority is, my understanding, proposing a 5% increase in council tax or thereabouts, so going for the full 2 and 3% social care precept. So that might be their rationale for recommending that. Why I've drawn your attention to that table, even if members just had the 12% scheme and adopted the proposal from Councillor Young, you would still be providing significantly more support to households than all but one of the authorities, and that one authority would only have a better scheme for 1 year. So historically, your scheme of 12% has provided a lot of extra benefit, as you can see, between the other authorities, typically worth around about £100 each year since LCTS came in. So it's just so you had that full information in considering that. Obviously, as Councillor Young suggested, if the grant that's been received was used to help support the budget and help I think Councillor Young used the phrase "help the many," it protects the budget support fund, and that obviously would be more robust in terms of helping support next year's budget and the financial risks facing the authority. But I appreciate you're balancing some very difficult issues between the two, but that's the same in relation to the council tax level and the social care precept.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Marshall.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, totally agree with what's been said, and it was one of the issues I was going to highlight. But can I focus on something else out of the report? Or are we just talking about the council tax?
No, if it's in the report, we can discuss it.
Right. Can I just take an issue with page 5? Improve Better Care Fund. Have you got it, Chris? It's on the table at the bottom.
Are you in the main? Yes, page 5 of the main report.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, the main report.
Yep.
It states that we've had a 7% increase for 21-22, but I would have appreciated the monetary value. And what is the additional monies for the pooled budget?
Sorry, I've included. Sorry. What I'm trying to show in that table is the changes in funding between 15-16 and 21-22. And apologies if the table's not clear. So the top line shows a council tax funded 49% of funding in 15-16, and that's increased to 61%. Government grant has fallen from funding 51% of our total budget to 32%. For the Improved Better Care Fund and Social Care Grant, what I'm highlighting there is we received no grants. Those grants didn't exist in 15-16. They now make up 7% of the budget, of the resources of the total of the council in 21-22. It's not a 7% increase for 21-22. So sorry if that's not clear from the table. And
I was
that's
just
why
saying, sorry, go on.
That's why I'd use percentages, because what I was trying to show in that table was the shift in funding, and it was to try and drive home the point that council tax is now picking up a much bigger burden of local service costs, and government grant has been reduced from 51% to 32%, which is the basic reason we've had to make the cuts in the last 9 years. And I don't think I'm saying anything that doesn't reflect the facts of the situation we've had to deal with. It's partly being mitigated by the Improved Better Care Fund and the Social Care Grant.
Yeah, I think it was just misleading for myself when it said like new funding stream. I just wondered why, or the monetary value hadn't been put instead of the percentage. But yeah, I understand that. And another point I'd like to raise is on page 8, the new homes build, 349,000. I just want, where's this gone in the budget, Chris? And why have members not been included in the decision making around this? Is we in a governance model, decision where we would like it placed?
I think if I give you a brief history of the new homes bonus, it was effectively set up a number of years ago. The government took the money out of the main revenue support grant at the national level. So when they did that, as soon as the money started coming in, we just built it into the base budget as a line. It's been reducing each year. It was originally provided for 6 years, and then after in the 7th year, the first of the 6 years dropped out. They then rolled that forward to only paying it for 4 years, but they've then changed that scheme again. And as we've set out in the report, that for 2021, we're only getting 2 years of what's referred to as legacy payments, so they're the old years, plus a new allocation for 21-22. So that resource is already built in to the budget deficits already, because it's a recurring resource in the same way as the revenue support grant.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Marshall. Was that everything?
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Councillor Tennant.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I know I seconded your motion, and I think it's been a very, very difficult year for everybody all around. And I want to appreciate Chris Little's work on presenting a very, very detailed and strong position. I absolutely appreciate the work that he's put in, and he has made it clear that for a number of years consistently, and what looks like in the future, it's another example of the government really forcing councils to make difficult decisions in terms of putting us between a rock and a hard place. I absolutely agree with Chair's argument that we need to give people breathing space with regards to CT, and that does not take away that we still have built-in budget pressures, and I completely recognise that, and all councillors should take that into account when making a decision. I just wanted to say that, and then support Chair's motion.
Thank you, Councillor Tennant. I've got Councillor Smith.
Hi. Just to start off, I just want to agree wholeheartedly with your proposal in relation to the council tax freeze. It was something that I again put out on social media a while ago, that I think that people in this town actually have had to put up with a lot lately. An increase in council tax would be another financial burden that they couldn't quite afford. So you do have my support in the council tax freeze. In regards to 5.8, which is the LCTS, I feel we should support again the full town, as we do have a lot of working poor in this town, people who get universal credit but don't actually get local council tax support. So if we just concentrate on these people who do get local council tax support, we alienate the other people who are actually on the borderline. So I feel that that money should be used to support the wider range of towns, so we can help a lot more people rather than the rest. In 4.27, in regards to the bulky waste scheme, I would like to add another option in there, which would be, again, to help the wider range, rather than in option 1, which you're just offering 60 free bulky wastes to each ward, and then the other one charging the same price but being able to get a lot more done. I think we should reduce it to £10 rather than 20 and £5 for the people who are on the support scheme. Which means that we'll be able to, again, help the wider range of people and also get a lot more fly tipping off the, because if you can't afford the £20, doesn't matter how many people that you get out there to do it, they're not going to pay the £20. So reduce the cost and then reduce the amount of extra workers that you put on there, and then cut the cloth accordingly. So if you have a reduced amount of money in, you reduce the amount of extra support you put in there, but still be able to help the wider range. Cheers.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Can I just clarify, though, on that second point you made there? Are you proposing, sorry, just so I can get my head around exactly, the whole bulky waste collection scheme for the entire year is reduced to £10, or for the specific scheme that's mentioned in here, rather than it being 60 collections that are free, it'd be 120 at £10, is that?
Yes.
Right, okay, right, thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to get my head around what you were proposing.
No, it's okay. It's straight in my head, but when it comes out my mouth, it might sound a bit different.
Right, thanks. Councillor James?
Thank you, Chair. Now, that was an opportune lead-in, really, because one of the issues that I want to raise is around the bulky waste scheme, as I'm sure that you would appreciate. As one of the wards that used to fund this through our ward members' budget, I'm concerned about the actual financial package that's being identified in both options 1 and options 2, because they're not accurate. The fact is that Manor House ward, we used to put in £2,500 out of our 3 ward budgets per year, on top of which we actually used to get about £1,000 to £1,500 from 13, because 13 still owns quite a number of properties within the town. So our overall package was about £3,500 to £4,000, including the delivery of the household letters to tell them which day their collection would be free. And it used to be accumulated over a week. Now, in the original arrangements, we used to have 240 a day for 5 days out of that money. By the end of the programme, I think we were getting something like about 160 for the same money, because obviously the prices had changed. And I also want to point out that in a number of wards, Manor House being one of them, the Bruce being another, and the Headland being another, and there'll certainly be others as well, we still have a high density of poorer families who would qualify for the half price. So on the £20 and £10 option, the majority, at least half of our households would have qualified for the £10 payment. Now, so we used to negotiate with the neighbourhood services team, and we paid the equivalent of £15 per household pickup, so that it was in the middle, right? And that used to balance itself out then. Those that would have paid 20 get it for free anyway during the period, but the organisation, the neighbourhood services, would get £15, and those that would have qualified for 10 also they got £15. So it balanced itself out over the period, depending and across the household using it. Now, it was a very well used scheme, and residents really did benefit from it. Now, the argument comes as to how you fund it, and the problem is that we have to fund fly tipping. We have no way of limiting the potential costs of fly tipping, and therefore I believe that over time, maybe in 1 or 2 years of actually funding a scheme, we would actually be able to utilise the monies that we had saved against fly tipping across the town. That would be the outcome. But I'm interested in what Lisa said, and I would want to see more detail on that option. But the fact is that this 60 bulky waste for 20,000 across 12 wards isn't a reflection of what we were actually looking at on a one ward basis. So I don't understand why 13 are not contributing, and have they not yet been asked? And if not, why not? And so I would want far more detail on the bulky waste arrangements that are being proposed, because at the moment I don't believe that what we've been offered as an option one is actually accurate or financially sound. Because Shane said that there is behind the scenes the opportunity to get a large contribution from 13, who in many wards, mine included, are still 50-50 tenure. So they have half of the households in the ward. So I would want more information on the bulky waste. Moving further down the page, on page 15, the homelessness and rough sleeping funding. I'm aware that quite a large amount of money out of the first tranche of homelessness money through the COVID arrangements, which I did support, actually taking homeless people, genuinely homeless people, off the streets in order to keep them safe, was spent in the Melbourne hotel arrangements. And I would like to see how many actually benefited from that, how many people were actually taken into the Melbourne through Families First, and how much we actually contributed to that. Because I think when you divide one into the other, it was an extremely high cost per bed for a period of time, which could have actually been utilised in a much better way and still benefited the homeless people being off the street. So I think that there were savings to be made there, and I would be very concerned if we're just duplicating what we did last winter. In addition to that, I would also like to ask about COVID, and I've already voiced this concern in a number of different places in recent weeks and months. I don't believe that members are actually aware of the total amount of COVID benefit that we've had from government as a figure. We certainly are not aware of the total ways that it's been spent, and I would want to see, before I'm prepared to hold my hand up for a budget at all, exactly where the COVID money has been spent, a reflection of what is then unused money, how it can be used. And so I want to see a lot more detail on COVID before I would support any budget. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor James. Just listening to what you're saying there, obviously, I am aware that there is a working group currently ongoing that's looking at fly tipping with outside partners as well. And given that there has been another option put on the table that hasn't been properly costed yet, and there's the comments that you made there, Councillor James, in relation to potentially finding and asking for outside income from partner organisations. I would suggest that we don't make a decision on this today, and that we refer this back to this committee at a later date when we can get more information, we can get all of those other options, and we can make an informed decision. I think that would be the most prudent step to take at this point in time.
Well, can I just clarify, Chair, what you're saying there?
Yeah.
So that I know whether I would support it or not.
So the decision would be, sorry, go on, yeah.
If you defer it to later in the year, when exactly? And would it actually still take place this financial year, or are you kicking it into the long grass and looking at it for next year?
Personally, I'm not kicking it into the long grass. I'm just trying to make sure that members have all of the information in front of them so that they can make an informed choice. I know we have another FMP in February on the 15th. I don't know if we'd be able to get things in time because of the lateness of this meeting. Let me just see if there's another one. Sorry, there's another one on the 15th of March that we could potentially bring it back to, if members are happy with that.
Well, can I suggest, Chair, that, I mean, it is a critical issue for large parts of the town, including in particular the rural areas of the town, regularly fly tipped, and farmers end up picking up the costs to have land cleared. And so I think there is an absolute crucial arrangement needed here to get this on the stocks now, or as quickly as possible, but it needs to be a workable scheme. And at the moment, I don't feel that we have the correct information. There are options that are available in addition to what we're seeing in the report. But I would be concerned if we end up with a situation where it's dragged out for months and months, and therefore people say, well, now there's no time to actually implement it fairly because some wards wouldn't get it in this financial year. So
well, if
it
you're
needs to
happy,
be done
then
quickly.
yeah, if you're happy, then as chair of this committee, I'm happy for it to come back in March with all of the other options.
Well,
So it's within this financial year
yeah,
for us to
well,
implement.
I would prefer for it to come back in February if that's possible. And at the moment, because of we don't know whether officers could bring something back as quickly as that, but it does definitely need to be dealt with in the next 6 weeks.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then the other thing you mentioned there, Councillor James, in relation to the homeless figures and what have you. I appreciate you're not normally a member of Finance and Policy, but we did have a report come from the Director of Adult and Community-Based Services, or was it Children's Services, sorry, back in August, I think it was. So if so I can dig that out and I can get that sent over to you. If that's
yeah, well, I think that I actually saw that, Chair, or saw part of it, which is why I'm raising the question as to how much we paid per capita, per day or week for homeless people to be housed in the Melbourne, because I think it was actually a huge figure.
And it's all contained within the report we received in August, to my knowledge. So I'm more than happy to get that sent out to all members if they feel they need it. Okay, I've got Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. And I think along with most of the members who've spoken so far, I will be supporting the 0% increase, and as will the Labour group. But we don't take this decision lightly at all. I think that Chris Little has very clearly outlined the ongoing financial pressures that this council faces. And I think his report also, I think, very succinctly gives a picture as to where much of the problem lies. And I think that some of the figures that he outlined in there, which illustrate the way in which grant funding has drastically increased, and the pressure for sustaining local government funding has moved significantly towards council tax and social care precept, is going to leave authorities like Hartlepool with massive, massive financial problems going forward and increased burdens for local people going forward. That's completely wrong, absolutely wrong. And it is a policy on the government's part which will hit local communities, towns such as Hartlepool, extremely hard, and place increased financial benefits in the longer term on those least able to pay. So we do support the 0% position. We are in, it's not just a rainy day at the moment, we're in an absolute deluge. We're in the middle of monsoon season. And I think what you said earlier, Chair, about the stresses that people in Hartlepool have faced in this year, I think placing a 5% council tax increase on them will be absolutely inappropriate at this point in time. But we do appreciate the difficulties that this council is facing going forward with its budget and where much of the blame for that lies.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. As always, you raised some very good points. And I think you're right. The shift, nobody can get away from the fact that the shift has been put on local government or from central government. And unfortunately, the policy itself diverts attention and the anger away from central government and puts it onto us. And sadly, what that results in is us then arguing amongst ourselves, generally speaking, kind of blaming each other, when actual fact, we should have a united voice in pointing the finger right back at them and working with everybody we can, whether it be the LGA, whether it be trade unions or our members of parliament. We need to be working with everybody to point the finger back at them and make enough noise to make people realise where the blame should lie. And I can say that I'm not playing party politics here, but it's just the truth. Whether people like to accept it or not, it is the truth. So thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Akers-Belcher.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased I'm coming in a bit later because a lot of the points that I was going to cover, have already been covered. But before, I go on to the points within the report, I would just like to say that I really appreciate the statement that you made right at the very beginning, because I've made no secret of the fact going back to last August that we were supportive of policy committees not looking at any cuts or savings, however it was going to be wrapped up, on the understanding we were going to be presented with an option where we could freeze council tax. So I really welcome, and I'm quite happy to support, the coalition, in their decision, for a council tax freeze for this year, which is what I'd indicated going back to last August. But I would like to pick up on a couple of particular items, if I may, and I'm quite happy to go through them one by one and just look for a response, if that's okay. So the first item is, I think Councillor James has already covered it slightly, but on page 8, it is to do with the COVID-19 expenditure pressure grants. And I note that the 5th grant is £3.178 million. So in total, we have received 15.618 million. And I do note the point that Councillor James made, that we haven't yet seen a schedule of expenditure or commitments against. And there's actually a recommendation on page 31 of the report. And that item 2 states uncommitted money should go into council reserves. And for that reason, until members have the oversight of what's been spent, and what is forecast to be spent, bearing in mind, Chris has already mentioned that there's going to be a further return on what those commitments are going to be in the first quarter of the year. I don't think it's prudent upon the council to make a decision to move any unspent money into reserves, on the floor of council, which would tie us into a decision for 6 months constitutionally. And lots of members have already mentioned that, we have reserves and everything for a rainy day, but when you look outside with the current pandemic, Councillor Thomas has already commented on the fact that, it's bucketing down outside and we need to do all we can. So I would like to see that recommendation removed from the report purely until, we have a report come forward detailing what members have asked for around the expenditure of COVID. So, if that can be considered, please.
Sorry, Councillor, I missed the start of what you broke up a little bit. So I missed the start. Which recommendation was that you were talking about? Sorry.
It is the recommendation on page 31, and item 2, which refers to COVID, states uncommitted money should go into the council reserves. And I would like that at the current time. It can still be done before the end of the municipal year, but until we've had that report back to finance and policy, and it's just a case of deferring that recommendation to a later date.
Chris? Sorry,
no. I think the rationale behind that recommendation, it was back to the points I'd made. The government have given us that funding, which is allocated to me spend in 21-22 financially. I nearly mix my financial years up. What I'm trying to suggest to members, and it can be subject to a future report, but I think I'd still recommend, I'd suggest we leave the recommendation in, because I think it underpins the overall robustness advice I'm trying to give the authority, and it sets out a commitment that when we've set the budget, that if we need to use that money for extra spending pressures, and I think they will come, and that's why I'd refer to the letter from the Department of Health. I think they have effectively, through that letter, pointed the care sector at councils, that's where the next funding to fund the care sector is coming from. They will say, get yourself to your local authority, don't come to our door. We haven't had those knocks on the door yet, but the letter only came out last week. So there will be calls on that funding. Hopefully we can keep some of that funding, because the rationale is, at the moment, it appears that funding will only be there for 21-22. We don't know whether it'll be clawed back. So if we could use it to meet some of our own pressures that meet the definitions that the government have set out for that, that would protect our own reserves, and those reserves will be available to support the council going forward. I think possibly as a compromise to Councillor Belcher's point is perhaps before actually we make those transfers, and during the course of sort of probably more into next year, we can bring reports back to Finance and Policy Committee setting out exactly the plans for using that additional money, because the decisions will need to be made. But I think by having the recommendation, it sets out an intent of the authority that yes, you're going to use an awful lot of reserves to balance your budget this year. That will raise a set of concerns with potential with our auditors, but that's why the intention of that recommendation was to give a rounded picture that we're trying to manage financial risk in a very difficult way. And I think if we could add something at the end, that any use would be approved by Finance and Policy Committee, I'd hope that would give the the balance between what's worded now and what Councillor Belcher's alluding to.
Chair, can I just come back, because I do take the point, because it's unring-fenced money, and my concern is constitutionally, we'd be tying that money will be in reserves. So perhaps if we could change the wording, that would be held, and we will spend it within the year. We need some sort of compromise. If the recommendation's going to be in, perhaps it needs to say that it's subject to further reports that will be presented to Finance and Policy, on how it is going to be spent with regards to the pandemic. Because it's pointless holding it over to future years when the people of Hartlepool are suffering now.
Mr. Little, did you want to come back?
So I've just reread it. The first recommendation did say it would be subject to separate reports. Sorry, there was that many recommendations. I think what I'm trying to recommend to members is that if we have to spend the money on the things that the government have indicated that we might have to, there might be nothing left. But what we're going to try to do as a corporate management team is to manage those pressures, and if not, to then use that money effectively. That we've got huge pressures that we're funding now our own budget in relation to particularly look after children that meet the definition. We would use that reserve in 21-22 to protect our own reserves, because the government can't take our own reserves off us, but they may take this unring-fenced grant off us. I think that's why I'd alluded to the extra return. The returns each month, we've now done 9. Each month gets more onerous, and I have a fear that that if authorities aren't spending those monies, given the state of the finances, there may be clawback. Whereas if we go down this route, it is designed, if we put it into the council's reserves, when you do a next year's budget, it'll be members determine how those reserves are used. The intention behind this is the proposal, and I think it's going to be carried today, of 0 and 0, defers a budget deficit of 5.6 million to 22-23. We need to get as much money into the budget support fund to manage that year, because in less than 12 months, you're going to be faced with some horrendous decisions to balance out £5.6 million. And if we can do what we've done, to use 5.6 million from memory is probably the most we've ever used. We've used a lot in the past, and we've had a plan and got through it, but it's going to be much more difficult. And I think we're hopefully on the same page on this one. And I think we've said that we'll come back with a report on how we will spend that money, and then the decision around the use of that reserves will come through Finance and Policy as part of next year's budget round, and it'll then go to full council, and hopefully that helps.
Chair, can I just come back? So simply, why couldn't it just say that it'll go into the budget support fund rather than reserves, just from a clarity point of view?
I'll change it. I think that's what I'd meant, Christopher. So apologies for that. I'll change it to budget support fund.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we'll yeah.
Are you okay if I just carry on with the questions?
Oh, you're not finished.
No. I just want some clarity. On page 15, when we were talking about the bulky waste, I'm quite happy to support that to go into neighbourhood services for that discussion. But I do accept what Councillor Smith was proposing, that you get more for your money, more options. So I'm quite happy to support that. The next item is on page 24. and it is to do with capital receipts. And I know the additional information has gone out at the moment, and I'm a little bit concerned because I don't want to go into the detail of it, because all members have been notified of what the capital receipts target includes, but what it also doesn't include. And I think some of the wording on 8.16 to then talk about that we've got very little to sell, because in actual fact, the things that aren't included in the capital receipts balance demonstrates that if you added all them up together, plus the additional land that may be sold at Brereton, and the fact that we still have huge amounts of land at Hart, I think it's, I don't want to use the term misleading, but we've sort of like got negotiations ongoing for money that's going to come in. And talking to a lot of members, then we've waited all year for a neighbourhood investment plan. And historically, we gave up ward member budgets and we created a pot of money that could be spent in neighbourhoods. And I'm going to say this as chair of regeneration, that the regeneration of Hartlepool isn't just about the core, it's about each and every member's wards and actually putting money back in. And we've spent all year asking for how we're going to progress problems with parking, play areas. We've had huge debates about play equipment for the disabled, play equipment, like, you know, down seating, additional resources down there, the fact of the car park, like, you know, all the things that we wanted on the extended car park haven't been completed. We've got members coming to us around footpaths. And why can we not move that, rather than put the capital receipts monies into a capital reserve, why can't it go into the neighbourhood investment plan, so that actually all members can shape and craft the expenditure of how it's going to be spent in our wards? And so I would like that to be considered, like, you know, because it's the here and now, and members all have put forward schemes and we've made no progress over the last year. So I don't know what Chris's view is with regards to that, but at the moment I don't even have a timescale of when there's going to be a presentation on the neighbourhood investment plan, and we've been asking for a year.
Chris, do you want to come in?
I think, if I've understood it correctly, I'll just clarify. I think there are two parts to the question. One is around future capital receipts, and I think if we haven't made any suggestions to how they're used, and I think we've said in the report there needs to be a future report. So it could be that when we can produce that report, we bring it back, and would it be sensible at that point that one of the considerations at that point might be neighbourhood investment fund. In relation to the receipts and the recommendation in the report about the 680,000, I think the recommendation in the report, my advice to members is we are at the very start of a big capital programme, and we don't know how costs are going to actually develop for those. We've got budgets for them, but we are undertaking massive schemes, and it would just seem prudent to earmark that to manage the risks in relation to the capital programme. I'd probably particularly say that on the back of the decisions that are going to be made today around the reduction in reserves to support the budget. And, you know, I think members are very, you know, thankful for some of the comments that members have made. I appreciate them. I actually appreciate and understand the issue that you're in with the information and the guidance I give you in the report. You know, it puts you in a difficult position. I think the package that we're trying to give you today, if it gives you the council tax freeze for next year, we need to just be cautious on the areas where we've recommended caution. So I think the suggestion that came from the floor around using less of the budget support fund, but by not being even more supportive with our local council tax support scheme, that potentially keeps nearly £1 million in the budget support fund. If members support that because you haven't voted on it, I think for the capital 680, I would certainly be sticking with the recommendation in the report. I think that should stay to manage the risks of the capital programme. But then the point around future capital receipts, certainly open for debate for members at a future date when we're certain as to the timing around, is the priority neighbourhood investment, or is the priority whatever it may be at the time?
Can I just come back, Chair? The point I'm trying to make is that I don't want to go in, move into closed session where we're talking about actual money, but the capital receipts potentially that we've got in the offing are more than the £680,000. Members have already waited to invest in their estates and have, things addressed for a year. And we've made no progress. We've got no ward member budgets, and we've all got schemes about disability access and all of that we're not doing. So why couldn't the recommendation be there goes a neighbourhood investment plan, and a future report comes forward to put the future capital receipts in the capital programme? And I'm not being funny, but I'll use an example of when originally 3 years ago, practically, where we were looking at the spend on Indigenous growth money is coming from the combined authority, and we made decisions. And in those 3 years, we've made no progress whatsoever. And all we'll end up doing is putting another £680,000 into a pot that we may spend in the future, subject to a business case. But at the moment, we've got, our wards, no dropped curbs. We're not getting parking addressed. We're not getting the plate equipment replaced. And we've been asking for a year for a plan around neighbourhood investment, and all our residents are having to wait, subject to what might happen in the future. So, if what I would like, if there's going to be dissent to our proposal, is, and when we get to the recommendations, can we vote on each recommendation individually? Because obviously we need to discuss, as we go through them.
Can I just say, Councillor, but I must admit, I don't take offence to, but I disagree with the view that we haven't made progress in any of the neighbourhood investment schemes, because to my knowledge, 4 play areas across the town this year have been improved. Disabled equipment have been put in to at least 3 of them, I believe. And I'd bring Denise in if she can, because you do raise a good point about when the next neighbourhood investment fund is coming forward. But it's in the backdrop of everything else we've been trying to cope with this year, and it's not using COVID as an excuse, but it's the reality of the situation. We've been dealing with an awful lot, and some things have unfortunately slipped a little bit. Denise, are you aware of when the report might come forward?
So, Councillor Akers-Belch is quite right that we have been looking at that, and because of the very difficult year we have been in, resources have had to be reallocated. For example, our building maintenance team and our highways team have been delivering food parcels and prescriptions, and in this last week they've been working on the community testing centre, which we hope will go live on Wednesday. That isn't to say that we haven't kept our eye off the ball. In the current neighbourhood investment plan, there is an underspend, and it is delegated to myself and the Chair of Finance and Policy, and I'm waiting for costings coming forward on the final scheme because I've challenged some of them. That should be with us in the next few weeks. There is, I think from memory, already an allocation in the current capital programme, and I can't remember if it's £500,000 or £1 million. I think it's the latter, and we will be working that through based on schemes that have been previously submitted, and that was some years ago. And I think it would be prudent to actually have another conversation with members. Are the schemes that you put forward for your ward then still a priority? And then we can prioritise those schemes and bring a new report into Finance and Policy. But I do have to advise that obviously it's been an extremely busy year. Members are fully aware of that, and resources have been spent elsewhere, which has resulted in delays. I would also comment to support Chris that the supply chain on building materials and other equipment around the town, barriers, for example, lampposts, everything else, we've seen an increase in those costs because of COVID and the supply chain and getting them across from the, because a lot of stuff comes from across the Europe and the rest of the world. So that is why I think it's prudent to be cautious at this stage. But that's not to say that we can't still move at pace.
Chair, do
Thank
you want me to
Denise.
carry on with the
Yeah,
questions?
I was talking away there, but I was muted, so I do apologise. Have you got much more? I'm not being rude, but it's obviously.
I've only got a couple.
Okay, it's just there are other people who haven't had chance.
It's just I want some clarity on what Councillor Young had proposed as well, but it ties into my next point, which is on page 25, and that is on child and family poverty. And it states that there are no considerations, but I'm a little bit concerned because it says there's no considerations, but we've got a backdrop of potentially lots of residents across the town losing the uplift in universal credit. And we are proposing within the report that there was going to be elements where on the officer's advice to put council tax up. We've got at the current year, we are paying everybody's council tax potentially. They would have gotten a bill for £150 if they want LCTS, and we propose now to take that away completely. So yes, a lot of people across the town will have no increase in their council tax, but every single person under local council tax support, if my understanding is correct, will go from having a zero bill in 2021 to having a £150 bill in 21-22. And so can I just get clarity that what Councillor Young is proposing, that we don't go with any of the support schemes and introduce it gradually, that every person on local council tax support will go from having a zero bill this year to a £150 bill next year, plus whatever the police and fire put on top of that. Is that correct?
I can ask Councillor Young to come back in and clarify, but I believe that's my understanding of it, yes, and it would go back to the previous level that it was each year before this current one when the government covered it once.
That's correct, yeah. That's it. That's exactly right, yes.
Okay, that was my last question, and I'd go back to the point when we get the recommendations. Therefore, can we have a vote on each one?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, I've got quite a few people with their hands up, but I'm going to try and bring in those who haven't had a chance to speak yet. So I've got Councillor Prince.
Thanks, Chair. I have a couple of questions. Chris Little just walked off, and it's him I think I need to ask.
Oh. I think he's gone to grab a drink of water. 1 second, I'll just get him back.
It's all right. He deserves one, bless him. Sorry, Chris. I don't know if you've got these answers on you, but I've got a couple of questions, but they're not as long as Christopher Akers-Belcher's. Do we know what percentage of council taxpayers do get some kind of local council tax support?
It's for working aid households, trying to think, it's about 7,000 households or so, and then there's about the same number of pensioners who receive support. So about 14,000 get some support out of about 40,000 households. So it's approaching a third of our households.
That was my next question. Did it include pension credits? So you've said yes there, essentially, haven't you, with pensioners? And then just in relation, sorry, Chris, were you going to say something else? In relation to sort of Mike Young's proposal, whilst I understand where he's coming from, what we've got to remember as members is that not everybody gets the 12%. So when it comes to local council tax support, it's proportional. So like Lisa raised with working poor, you know, you might get some support that isn't as vast as the 12%. And so when looking at taking this away from people, we've got to remember, like Christopher just raised, people on universal credit, they're going to lose £1,000 this year, which although Chris Little said in his report to us all that they weren't taking it into account, I think that many of us would be able to sympathise that if you got an extra £1,000 in your year and then it got taken off you the year after, you would feel it. Because you would have adjusted your budget accordingly, and we've got to be sort of mindful that that's going to affect a large proportion of our residents across the town. And it's sort of a 50% difference that we're proposing to these people who get 12%. If we gave them the level of support that Chris had recommended in the middle of £85, they'd be paying £82 a year.
Chair, if I can, what does Councillor Prince suggest we do then? How does she suggest we balance the budget?
Hang on, Mike.
Yeah, so it's a 50% difference that we're proposing, and I just think that it's disproportionately affecting sort of people on the low incomes. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. To be honest, Councillor Prince, I see your point, and I understand, and it's not. I think what's being proposed isn't an easy one to take. But similarly, I remember other members proposed this was exactly what we did when the 100% was given as a one-off by the government last year, or sorry, this current financial year, and it was always billed initially as a one-off to help people through this year. And of course, all of those people who were furloughed and lost at least 20% of their income this year, they didn't receive any additional support with their council tax. So it's balance, I guess, isn't it? Because on one hand, you're helping everybody, and in another, you're only helping a select few. And I guess there is that point that Councillor Smith raised. There are many people out there who are just on the verge of the breadline, and therefore they're not entitled to everything. And it's whether we can help as many as possible or a certain few. And I know the Labour group have raised a motion in relation to the universal credit uplift that will be coming to full council on Thursday, and obviously we'll have a good discussion about that then. Thank you. Councillor Lindridge.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've had my hand up since 10 to 11. Yeah, really good comments from councillors. I don't want to disagree with any of them, actually. Lots of the points I wanted to raise have been raised, by previous councillors there. So I'd just like to add the fact that I would be supporting a nil increase. We need to lessen the pain. It's been a really difficult year across the country, and particularly for residents in Hartlepool. I am concerned, however, the fact that the responsibility is being passed by the government onto local authorities. We've got an unprecedented government borrowing deficit, which is going to increase over the next 2 years, I would say. Yeah. And what I'd like to ask Chris, if that's okay, in the 6 years I've been on finance and policy, I've always tried to support a robust budget that he's put forward and trying to balance that with the needs of the residents. What concerns me is the fact that it's a little bit of the unknown, in the sense that which is inevitable in my opinion, that the government are going to reduce the core funding grant probably and increase it or change it with a business rates review. Right now, what does that do to the prudence that Chris has put in over the last 5 or 6 years, in terms of if the government suggests that we have a 2% core and a 3% adult precept, yeah, and that continues, and we don't put this into practice this year or next even, does that mean the robust budget that Chris has been trying to keep hold of over the years goes all to pot, so to speak? Just in simple terms, would we go into special measures? But I'm saying that whether we do or not, this is going to have implications right across the country. So what's Chris's view on the terms of, if we don't implement increases, and I don't agree with them, how would that put Hartlepool in terms of deficits?
I think what we've tried to set out in the robustness advice is which is the most robust and which is the least. And I think I've said clearly in 11.12 that not increasing council tax and the social care precept, I have to advise members, I don't think it is robust in terms of the scale of the deficit we're deferring of £5.6 million. What that means next year is obviously the decisions you make next year. There'll be a new set of advice. I think it partly picks up the previous debate around the local council tax support. The proposal that Councillor Young's put forward I fully appreciate means that there will be less support for local council tax support households than is proposed in the report with the option that was recommended. As I pointed out in the supplementary information, even without that funding, and I'm careful as I say these comments because I fully appreciate how important this money is to the people who claim it. Our 12% scheme has consistently provided a lot more support, and I think that's something that members have obviously been very proud of being able to have a 12% scheme. The figures, so you can see them, are set out that even if you remove the extra support, we are still providing £100 support, near enough more than the other authorities. Only one authority will beat us in terms of that support next year, and they are implementing a 5% increase, or that's their very clear intention. That means when they remove this temporary funding in 12 months' time, their LCTS households will have to pay that 5% as well on top of the removal. So on balance, over time, Hartlepool having a 12% scheme has been worth an incredible amount of support to households. You are talking at least £100 a year. We've had the scheme in place now since 2013-14. The flip side of that, if you went to a 20% scheme, you get more council tax income for services. It's harder to collect, but the income will be collected. It will be very hard to collect from those households. But I think 12% has historically, it's a good balance for this town and this council. So just so you've got that, I think, and obviously if members choose that option that the Councillor Young's outlined, that keeps more in the budget support fund for the budget in 22-23, which obviously £1 million. If you're talking about, do we have a budget support fund of 3.4 million compared to a budget deferred next year of over 5, or a budget support fund of 4.4, an extra £1 million is critical to the managing that position in the following year. But I accept that the flip side of that is there's less support to some of our most vulnerable households this year. It is a real dilemma for members. But it's another part of the dilemma of, do you increase council tax and the social care precept? Wherever you turn, it's a different rock and a different hard place that you find yourselves in as members. The numbers just aren't adding up anymore because there's so much being taken out of the system and so much continued reliance on council tax increases. And what you'll be faced with next year is a report that brings forward a series of cuts in services that will be a list A, and a shorter list if you increase council tax, and it'll be pick what you want, members, but it will have a detrimental impact. There's no sugarcoat in this. It's no good pretending that it's going to get nicer for 22-23, because regrettably it's not.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I understand that, Chris, but sometimes you've got to have. We took enough pain at the moment, and if we have to sort of lessen that now by having a nil increase, then so be it. And then we'll have to deal with whatever we have to deal with next year, because we don't know what type of funding the government's going to give or take away next year. So the way I look at it, I can see virtually everybody being voting a nil increase in, and I would support that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lindridge. Councillor Young.
Sorry, Chair. I was trying to take my hand down rather than take the microphone on. Yeah, so some interesting points. I think to go back to Councillor Prince's point around the hardships of people. Yeah, I recognise that, and Chris has just identified that as well in what he said, and where do we balance it elsewhere? And that was the question I asked in terms of the point of order that I put forward. How then do we balance the budget? And it's going to be a struggle. I also am aware that there's been a motion put, and we've had a lot of debate now, but there's a motion put and seconded. And whilst I think debate has been hugely important on this particular issue, because it affects all of us, I think we probably need to move towards a vote.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Young. I think that would be a good opportunity for us to do that. We do have quite a lot still on the agenda as well. I think there has been an awful lot discussed, and the debate around it has been useful.
Chair, I'm still waiting for an answer.
In relation to what
I asked a
Councillor
question
James.
around the COVID monies as to a breakdown of what has been spent and how. And that's just been ignored by everyone. So I'll ask the question again. I want a breakdown of the COVID grants and monies that have come in from government and how they have been spent.
Okay, then we'll need to bring that to a future meeting of Finance and Policy, because obviously we don't have them here today.
Well, can I just say that if that's the case, I won't be able to vote for a budget, because the expenditure and the residue that we're being told is there, I'm not comfortable with until I actually see that breakdown. So it needs to be here before Thursday.
Chris?
I think we have reported details through to previous finance and policy committees in relation to, and we've kept members, I think, quite well informed, certainly in relation to the four main tiers of the tranches of funding. And when we started back in first reporting of a great fear that we weren't going to get enough funding from the government to the 12 billion for the four tranches, probably just say being sufficient. And I think the position keeps changing. We have previously, in response to previous members' questions, that there is other COVID funding available, that we've committed to bringing a report back to F&P. In terms of, I don't think it actually personally affects the decisions around the budget, because the budget now is predicated on the size of the amount we're going to take from the budget support fund, and in due course we can report through all of the outturns, and I think one of the recommendations already going to be changed. If any monies do come available, we could agree that anything will go into the budget support fund, which is effectively controlled by Finance and Policy Committee and full council, and it will be an integral part of the budget going forward. What makes my life dead easy? If we had 50 million in reserves, we could use that for the next 3 or 4 years. It would make life so easy, but we ain't got that much in reserves. So the more we can get into reserves, what we'll have is a plan that, taking 5.6 million out of this authority's budget, is going to be huge. I don't think we should underestimate the impact that is going to have, and the difficult decisions that are going to have to be made. What we need to try and do is get some more money, if we can, from any opportunities we can, to increase our budget support fund, to then potentially smooth that 5.6 million over, say, 2 years, because there'll be extra costs that we have to bear of, regrettably taking 5.6 million out is going to impact on our staff. People will lose their jobs, and I don't want to be emotive and I don't want to put numbers on it, but we're a people business, the services we provide, so there'll be costs of that. We need a balance. I think there's a great difficulty in the report today between the position I'm placed in as I'm being my own personal rock and a hard place with the robustness advice, because I know exactly my advice is in conflict with what members' desires are, that no one wants to increase council tax, particularly in a pandemic, particularly in a town that has relatively high levels of deprivation. We're all in a really difficult position. It's not just this year's budget. We need to be trying to put in place the financial foundations for the future years, and that's what everything that's before members is designed to do. And we'll come back and we can keep giving you more information in future reports. I every so often have a look at other councils' budget reports. I think we give far more information than I see in most of my colleagues' reports. I think we're dead open with our members, and I think that's the right way to be, because I think you need to understand the issues. And if someone can give me a report that they think's more open, I'll adopt it. I've got no problem doing that at all. I think we need to share the information, because it's unprecedented what we have to deal with.
Thank you, Chris. Right, I've got 2 more and then that's it. So Councillor Tennant.
Chair, I'm happy to go straight to the vote, and I would like to come back after the vote.
Councillor Harrison, in fairness, hasn't spoken, so I will bring her up. Councillor Harrison.
That's very kind of you, Chair. Thank you very much. I will be very short. I concur with an awful lot that's been said over this period of the debate, particularly around bulky waste, low income and the 12% scheme. But I particularly agree with what Shane said about working together against the common problem, which is the government, who have shown a complete disregard for the people of our town and the issues that we have. and that's where we should be putting our energies. So thank you, and thank you for everyone's comments.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Okay, we'll go to the recommendations then. So if we look at them in blocks, the first one, 12.1, it's recommended that members note the following 3 items within there. I believe, do we need to go to a recorded vote on each of these? That isn't this one anyway. All right, okay. Well, no, because there's changes to a couple of them. Yeah. Okay, so we'll go to 12.1 then. It's, as I say, it's recommended that members note the 3 items within 12.1. I'll hand over to David. Do we need to do a vote on them? Okay, since it's noted, is there any dissent on this? Sorry.
Noted.
No, I don't see any dissent. Thank you. In relation to 12.2, the revenue budget, I think it's been determined by members all speaking that we will take option 1, I believe, of a 0 council tax increase and 0% social care precept 2. Do we have any dissent on that, or do we need to take that to a recorded vote?
We need to record that vote, Chair.
Okay, that needs to be a recorded vote. Thank you.
Okay, and just to highlight, this is a recorded vote of Finance and Policy Committee members only. So I shall read down the list of Finance and Policy Committee members seeking their indication of a vote for, against, or an abstention. And that is specifically on the measure of a 0% increase in council tax and a 0% increase in the adult social care precept. Councillor Christopher Akers-Belcher.
For.
Councillor Brewer.
For option 1, 0 and 0.
Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Lindridge.
For.
Councillor Little.
For.
Councillor Marshall. Councillor Marshall.
For.
Councillor Moore.
For.
Councillor Smith.
For.
Councillor Tennant.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
For.
Councillor Young.
For.
That vote is unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, David. In relation to number 3, about the consideration from neighbourhood services in relation to bulky waste, I think there was an agreement there that we will make a recommendation as part of this, that this report comes back to Finance and Policy by March committee at the latest. Is there any dissent on that one? I don't see any. Thank you. LCTS decision. So the proposal that's been put forward and seconded is that the 12% scheme is retained as we've previously had, and that the basically in option 4 that the one-off grant in relation to this will be used to offset the council tax freeze for everybody, as opposed to a one-off grant towards LCTS claimants. Again, we'll go to a recorded vote because I think there may be some on that. And there was a request, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So that's on the proposal as just outlined by the Chair. Councillor Christopher Akers-Belcher.
With regards to in the wake of people losing the universal credit, I can't support an increase, like, you know, of people having to pay £150 next year when they paid nothing this year, so I must vote against.
Councillor Brewer.
Sorry, could you come back to me on this one?
No, Councillor, I'm sorry, I can't. You need to indicate your vote, I'm afraid.
Abstain for the abstain then.
Councillor Brown.
Nope, sorry, no. 4.
Councillor Brown?
4. Sorry, can we just get Councillor Brewer's final answer? Sorry.
Yes, it's 4. It's 4. My apologies.
You were just waiting for the text coming in.
No.
Councillor Brown?
4.
Councillor Lindridge?
4.
Councillor Little?
4.
Councillor Marshall?
Against, I can't vote for this.
Councillor Moore?
4.
Councillor Smith?
4.
Councillor Tennant?
4.
Councillor Thomas?
Against, for the same reasons outlined by Councillor Akers-Belcher.
Councillor Young?
4.
That chair is carried.
You're mute.
Thank you. So the next one in relation to COVID expenditure grant, I think with the addition, the alteration to, I think, number 2 that Councillor Akers-Belcher raised earlier, are members okay with that, and there's no dissent? See any? Thank you. We'll take the reserves and capital. Any issues with those? I haven't seen any raised without, in the debate. So if there's no dissent on those, we'll take those as agreed as well.
Chair, can I just say I did have a discussion around the capital receipts, and I did ask whether or not they could be considered as part of the neighbourhood investment plan.
Oh, you did. Sorry, Chris.
I suppose just the comments I'd made around the recommendation to put into a capital contingency was to reflect the risks that we've got in relation to a large capital programme. That it seems prudent. I think during the debate, I think the managing director confirmed that we have got a neighbourhood investment plan and some funding allocated. And I suppose we can confirm the figure for members after the meeting. The only other comment I'd make, and I didn't get a chance to in the debate, is previous capital receipts took a lot of hard work to achieve. And we were spending money before we'd achieved it, and that we managed that risk. I wouldn't want to be taking the risk in future of spending capital receipts we hadn't received. But I think the other recommendation that we bring back a further report on the next tranche of receipts, and then members determine how they use it, might be able to address that suggestion that one of the obviously priorities that members might want to consider is more funding for neighbourhood investment priorities. So that was all I wanted to add, Chair. Thank you.
Chair, can I just come back on that recommendation? Can someone just tell us categorically then, how much is in the neighbourhood investment plan, and give us an assurance that that neighbourhood investment plan is going to come to a very early meeting of finance and policy for us to make a decision before the end of this municipal year? Because I'm quite happy to support it if I know that progress is going to be made on the wish list and investment is going to happen in our wards.
Yeah. Okay. I've got Denise.
There is definitely an allocation in the current capital programme. And Chris is trying to check his spreadsheets on his tablet now. I'm almost positive it's £1 million, Chair, but we need to be accurate. And I can bring a report, most probably to the March Finance and Policy, which will set out principles for the proposed £1 million. But we will, as I said earlier, need to speak to members regarding the priorities they put forward previously. Are they still the same priorities? Because I appreciate Christopher's comment. It has taken a year to get this report, and priorities may have changed during that year. But I think we can bring the report with principles setting that out for March.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Akers-Belcher?
Can I request then that we have a members' seminar to discuss the neighbourhood investment plan to help shape the report before it comes to finance and policy, please?
Yeah, I think that's a fair request. I'd second that.
Yeah, and they're scheduled in each month, Chair, so we can do that.
Great, thank you. So on the back of that then, if there's no dissent with the recommendations in relation to reserves and capital, given what we've just discussed, Can we take them as agreed?
Agreed,
Yeah.
yes.
Great. Thank you very much. And that's all. Well, in relation to that. Thank you for all those members who aren't normally part of Finance and Policy who joined us for that one. You can and are welcome to hang around for the rest of the meeting if you want to. Otherwise, if you do leave now, then I ask that you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. So we've got 5.1 Towns Fund, Hartlepool Investment Plan, Director of Resources and Development.
Thank you, Chair. It has been a long morning, and this report was at Regeneration Committee last week, where it received a lot of debate and was fully supported. I don't intend to go through it in detail because members have had the report and they've had the opportunity to read it. Hartlepool is one of 100 places that have been invited to develop proposals for a town deal. We established a town deal board, which is chaired by private sector member Albie Patterson, who's been doing a sterling job in bringing us all together. The proposals set out in the investment plan align with the Towns Fund objectives, and the details of which are set out in section 4 of the report. The projects themselves are included in the report and are on pages 4, 5 and 6. And the next steps is that if members approve this today at Finance and Policy, the investment plan will be submitted on the 29th of January. Current proposals is that we should be notified within 2 months. Having said that, though, bearing in mind government are busy at the moment, we will have to keep an eye on that when that announcement comes out. So I think the only thing I would add, Chair, is that the Chair of Regeneration did give thanks to the Chair of the Town Investment Plan and the team of officers who have worked extremely hard during a difficult year to ensure we deliver the investment plan on time. And the further comment was regarding the child and family poverty assessment, which is attached to the report. And obviously by upskilling people, we will also be taking into account support to help those who find it difficult to manage their expenses. And we need to look at that, how we include that into the schemes going forward. So if it's okay with you, Chair, I'll just go straight to recommendations and for you.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from members on this one? Councillor Smith.
Hi, just a quick question. The officers that have been dealing with the Wesley, have they done their due diligence to make sure that the money that they received from the insurance is all getting put in to the project to make it suitable again, and we're just topping it up? They're not. The question I was asked was they're not keeping some money back because they know that they're getting money off us.
Denise.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Councillor Smith. What we'll need to do is, if we're successful with the full amount of allocation for the town investment plan, is we'll then work on the business case, and that detailed due diligence will be considered. But I would let you know that the work on the Wesley, what we're doing is contributing towards a bigger scheme, and the actual owner of that is actually putting in the bulk of the funding. But it's a very good point you raised about the insurance, and we need to make sure we take that on board.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. And thank you, Denise. I don't see any other hands raised. Again, I just echo the comments Councillor Akers-Belcher made at the Regeneration Committee, and thank both Albie Patterson and all of the other members of the Town Deal Board who've come from right across Hartlepool and contributed an awful lot in bringing this really good proposal forward. And I think it is a really robust proposal, and I think I'd like to think we stand a good chance of getting a good chunk of what we've asked for. And it's a good balance between capital and investing in skills and making sure that not only the current generation, but future generations to come are going to be upskilled and put into type of employment that's going to keep them, hopefully, in a job for life. So we'll go to the recommendations then. Is there any dissent from what's set out in the report? I don't see any. Thank you. Next one, 5.2 Brownfield Housing Fund, Lynn Street Housing Development. Chris, are you bringing this forward, or is it Denise?
I think I am. I think I am. I just had my reports in the wrong order, so I was about to do the other one. Sorry. I think this report's to give you an update in relation to the Lynn Street development that you've just mentioned in the Brownfield Housing Fund. Just briefly set out in the background that's a government initiative. Tees Valley Authority, Combined Authority have secured funding. And we've put in a bid to be and been shortlisted. They've been shortlisted for the first phase of sites. Our site's been, as I say, shortlisted in the first phase. The proposal is in relation to the existing land at our depot, the Drug and Alcohol Centre, and the Market Hotel. I think members have been around a long time, particularly the Market Hotel. We've been trying to sort that out for many, many years. The proposal is to secure grant funding from a combination of the Brownfield Housing Fund and also from Homes England and some prudential borrowing. And we've set out the report to deliver 47 affordable rented housing units. 4.9 details the project timescale. I think it's a good news project, but it will take some time. There's an awful lot of work to do to deliver this project. Obviously, because of the nature of where we're at the moment, the financial information set out on the not for publication information, we wouldn't want to declare our hand before we go out to secure contracts. I suppose a positive I can say is 43% of the scheme will be funded from grant funding that I've already mentioned, and 57% from prudential borrowing, which is fully supported by rental income. So this has absolutely nothing to do with the report you considered at the start of the meeting. I'm happy to take any questions. If not, Chair, given the time and the length of the meeting, the recommendations are set out in section 14.
Thank you, Chris. It's really good to see this proposal come forward. As some members will be aware, this is one that was always on our wish list, but we didn't think we would be able to move it forward anytime soon, certainly not without external funding as well. So I thank the team who've managed to put a fantastic bid together and secure this grant funding to ensure we can bring this proposal forward. And I think more broadly what it does is, and I'm pleased to say that should this one go forward, then that brings the total number of new housing units that we'll have brought forward as a council since March 19 to 97 properties. So that's going a really big way towards increasing the stock that the council are able to offer to local residents. We've got Councillor Young.
Is it 97?
It would be including these, yeah.
All right, okay. I think progress indeed on this one. I think we've all looked at it and looked at it and looked at it on the map and thought, will it ever happen? And I can remember having a conversation with Denise, and it was kind of, it got to the point where it was almost rolling of eyes at times, and it was like, oh, it's this one again we have to talk about. But I think Chris has alluded to the fact that we're still in early phases on this one, but that's progress in itself, and I look forward to a good resolution on this, to be honest. So well done everybody for bringing that to fruition. Well done.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Akers-Belcher.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just? I've got some questions from the pink papers. So, I fully support it, but I just wanted some clarification, so we'll be able to move into closed session.
Yeah, I guess we can. Hang on. Is there anybody who wants to speak or ask questions that aren't required in pinks? Because we'll cover them first and then move into it. So if it's all right, Councillor Akers-Belcher, we'll come back. All right.
Yeah,
Councillor
no problem.
Tennant.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm very happy with this proposal. I've always been a supporter of increasing social housing stock. It's been one of the fundamental reasons I got involved in politics, actually. The proposal is fantastic. I'm also very, very pleased to see that the borrowing is is against the potential receipts that we get. So it doesn't affect the budget that we've just discussed, as Chris Little has pointed out. That is certainly a big win. Very happy with the proposal, and I think it's exciting to bring it forward. It also helps the regeneration of the area, so I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Tennant. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Chris. It really is a good news story. And of course, the borrowings will eventually subside, and it just increases the HBC pot of funding. So as much of this as we can do, and as soon as possible, really, the better for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Marshall.
I'm sorry, my hand went up and I couldn't take it back down. Is it on? Still on now?
Yeah, let me see if I can take it down for you. One second.
Right.
Oh, it's gone.
Ah, right. Yeah, no bother.
Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. And just echoing, I think, some of the comments that have already been made. Welcome the scheme. But just a couple of points about the actual properties that are being developed themselves. And I think if we didn't already know it, I think one thing that COVID has really highlighted is the importance and absolute necessity of garden provision of properties. And I would just like some clarity as to whether or not the properties are going to have garden provision, because as I said, I think COVID really has illustrated very graphically the value of garden provision of properties. The second point is I note that there are 7 2-bedroom bungalows included in the current proposal, and I think, like many members on council, when housing issues come up, it is usually around residents looking to get into bungalow accommodation, and there clearly is a very big shortage of bungalows in Hartlepool. And is there any scope within the proposal to increase that bungalow provision? And the third point is thinking back to my adult services days, one of the big disappointments that I think we still have as an authority is the number of homes that have been developed in Hartlepool, which incorporate Homes for Life standards. I seem to recall the last time the committee received a report on that, it was only 0.6% of homes that had been built in the town since 2014 actually achieved that standard. And will any of these properties be built to Homes for Life standards?
I don't know if Denise can come in. What I will say is, Councillor Thomas, I do know that separate to this, we are looking at I'll be careful how much I say. We are looking at a completely different development, which would include all bungalows, hopefully coming through the pipeline very shortly, but we're still working through the details on that one as well. But I'll hand over to Denise to answer the others.
Thank you, Chair. I need to come back to you on the gardens, Councillor Thomas. I think from memory, from what I've seen, that definitely will do, because that is not something we would do, but I need to come back to you on that to confirm that. With respect to the bungalows, the more bungalows you increase, obviously the less properties you've got, because they take up a bigger footprint, and that would then not necessarily make the business case viable. So we always make sure that we get the maximum number of bungalows we can in any development we propose, so it's very unlikely that we'll be able to put more in there for this scheme. But I would remind members that the a previous decision of this committee was to produce, I think it was over 80 bungalows at another site over at Breaton. So the number of bungalows is increasing. When it comes to Homes for Life, again, obviously the sad thing is that those Homes for Life do cost more, and if we go down that route, we'll get less properties, and therefore then the scheme is less financially viable. But I know Councillor Thomas has raised this point before, and we'll look at where we can do that for future schemes. But because of the location of this site and the difficulties we're dealing with in terms of Heritage England and the government's timetable, we've had to actually get an outside body to work this scheme up, and they've come up with the most financially viable scheme for us. Otherwise, anything else would actually make this non-viable, and we'd be in a position where this scheme would just be sat there and we'd still continue to look at a derelict building. But I do take the points that Councillor Thomas has raised on board and feed that through for future developments where we can.
Thank you. Does that answer all of your questions, Councillor Thomas?
It does to an extent, but I think there's probably a discussion to be had outside of this meeting around future developments and how we work to increase the number of properties that are developed within the area up to Homes for Life standard. Because I think one of the things that this illustrates is some of the disconnect between some of the priorities that we have around supporting older adults, adults with disabilities, and the way in which our property development happens within the town. And I know that during my time as chair of adult services, we did have some initial discussions with planning about how we could start to address more effectively some of these issues, but that's probably a matter for another day and another discussion. But I would like to have that discussion sooner rather than later.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Thomas. We'll need to move into a closed session then. So I know it's already been requested by Councillor Akers-Belcher, so I'll second that request. We'll just need to pause for a moment whilst the stream is paused. And also I'd have to ask those who aren't usually privy to this to leave the meeting at this point.
Okay, we're back in open chair.
Thank you, members. We're back in open session again. Thank you for that. Right, so thank you for all the discussion, question and debate. We'll now go to the recommendations as set out in the report. With the alteration of 14.1b, changing it to prudential borrowing of up to 4.744 million. Are members happy with the recommendations? I see no dissent. Great. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to second last. No, it isn't even the second last, is it? Oh, we've got plenty to go. I'm getting excited. Right, 5.3, sale of land at Seaton Lane, Director of Resources and Development.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be brief on this one again. It brings forward a proposal to allow you to make a determination to a request that we've received to purchase some land from the council. The background of the report just reminds members that back in December 2018, we agreed to dispose of 2 parcels of land. At the time, you considered 2 offers. One was what we've called a conventional capital receipt cash offer. The other was a housing stock offer, whereby instead of getting cash, we were going to receive properties on the development. Those properties benefit the housing revenue account. The housing revenue account then makes a payment to the general fund for the value of the land. So it's a win-win because we get more housing stock and we get a capital receipt. Whereas with a traditional land sale deal, we just get the general fund benefit in terms of the capital receipt. We've set out in the plan that the developers approached us for a further parcel of land to extend their existing developments. There are a series of issues that we need to work through. I think what we want today is in principle to effectively progress this, and we've set out the issues that still need to be resolved in paragraph 5.6. Details of the offer are set out on the not for publication part of the report, and finalising that is part of the issues covered in 5.6. And if members are happy with it, the recommendations are set out in section 12 of the report.
Great, thank you, Chris. For me, I think the current scheme that's already in place and being worked up by these developers is a good one, and it's changing the complete look of Seaton Lane. They are selling particularly well, and I think the offer is a fair one. It also has the added benefit of opening up access, or secondary access, sorry, for our remaining land for us to be able to potentially develop or then sell on to other developers at another time. I'm happy to any questions or comments from other members. Councillor Akers-Belcher.
Thank you, Chair. I think looking at the report, and I understand under 5.6, they are still items to be resolved. Can I just ask how long would you anticipate it would take for the items under 5.6 to be resolved?
I suppose it depends if we can reach agreement with the developer. I suppose if your question is, will we endeavour to try and work through those quickly? I think the answer would be yes to that question. But I can't say how long it will take to resolve, because we don't know what the response will be to the council's stance. But if members want us to move on it, to progress quickly, we understand that the developer needs a reasonably quick answer, because it links to their existing development. But equally, I'm sure at some point they will want to protect themselves around the issues around planning permission. So I think there's a commitment from officers to resolve this. It's just we just wanted to flag that there are a few issues to resolve.
Chair, can I just come back with one other thing? Because I'm happy to support, the option A around, extending what we currently have. And I don't want to go into pink papers, but I remember back when we considered under finance and policy, and I also remember previous offers that we had on that land. And without, going into items that are commercially sensitive, I actually think, the offer that we had was a very, very good one and beneficial. And I remember going back to the debate around last year's budget and all the arguments we had about increasing the HRA and the benefits that Chris has already alluded to about getting a capital receipt and increasing our housing stock. And I just don't think, based on previous decisions that have gone through, we could get, you know, a better offer than what's on the table. And I just think it's a win-win, because, like, you know, we need to have some resilience in our budget going forward, and the opportunity to build our HRA is a really good one where we also get capital receipts. I'm quite happy to support that, as per what you said, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Akers-Belcher. Councillor Lindridge.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I will be supporting option 1. I think it is a good offer. Christopher's reiterated what I intended to say anyway. It's building up the housing stock, it's giving residents choice, it's developing an area that's in need of further regeneration, and if the 2 phases go ahead, even better. So I would be supporting or seconding the recommendation of option 1. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lindridge. Councillor McGuckin, Denise McGuckin.
That's not going to happen.
You've got more sense, yeah.
I think the point that Christopher raises is really good. Is you know, we have worked with this developer, and the first phase, I know where he comes from in terms of timescale, so I won't repeat that. I think that the risk in this one is regarding the planning situation, local plan, which we've highlighted in 4.4 as well, and that's the one we cannot control the timescale. So I think it's just some members are aware of that.
Thank you. Okay. So I think the general consensus, and I know it's my view as well, is that we look at option 1 within the recommendations. Is there any dissent from option 1? No, doesn't look like it. Okay, so it's agreed we'll go with option 1. Thank you. 6.1, council tax base 21-22.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a effectively report. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, I thought. I'll start against the statutory report to set the council tax base that effectively supports the budget decisions you made earlier. I think the key tables in paragraph 5.3. It shows the overall net council tax base. You can see from that table that the tax base is lower than the current year, and then that's purely down to the fact that there's been an increase basically in local council tax support claimants, which I think you're well aware of as from the impact of COVID on the economy. We have still got in a reasonable level of forecast housing growth of the equivalent of 220 Band D properties, and obviously that carries a degree of risk in achieving it, but I don't think it's a risk that's too much of a worry, hopefully, and as long as everything goes to plan. So the report's there for members to approve the tax base.
Okay, we need to do a recorded vote on this one. It's quite a strange one, but okay. David? I know you don't make the law, Haley. I don't hold it against you.
Thank you, Chair. So, based on the recommendations in the report, Councillor Christopher Akers-Belcher.
For.
Councillor Brewer.
For.
Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Lindridge.
For.
Councillor Little.
For.
Councillor Marshall. Councillor Marshall.
She's you're muted, Anne.
I know I'm having trouble with me. But sorry. That was about 6. Right, this is 4.
4. Thank you. Councillor Moore.
4.
Councillor Smith.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Tennant.
4.
Councillor Thomas.
4.
Councillor Young.
4.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. And then this is the final one. I'm right this time. So 6.2, Tees Valley Freeport bid. Managing Director.
Thank you, Chair. And we'll finish this morning, I think, well, this afternoon now, on a positive. This report seeks members' approval to support the Tees Valley Freeport bid, which will include Teesport and Hartlepool. It has been an extremely long morning, Chair, so I don't intend to go through the report in too much detail, but I do have to give credit to the Chair of Finance and Policy, who has, over the last year, fought really hard to make sure Hartlepool Port is included in that, so I think that should be recorded. The government is out at the moment to tender, and there are 10 free ports which will be awarded nationally, competition rather than tender. 7 will be in England and 1 will be in each of the devolved countries. The free ports status themselves will provide support to businesses, reduce administrative burdens on tariff controls, provide relief on taxes and other planning regulations. This is really important that Hartlepool is a part of that. The proposals are set out in section 4 of the report, and the report will be going to the Tees Valley Cabinet on January the 29th for full approval. There is a risk if Hartlepool does not support this as a council, that government may look at that and remove Hartlepool Port from that, which I know that's something members will be against anyway. So mainly this is to ask members to support the Tees Valley Freeport bid. We are, I have to say, already seeing interest in Hartlepool Port on the back of this proposal. So hopefully we will be successful and members will support this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Denise. Councillor Tennant.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, I do apologise.
Yeah, your taste in music's terrible.
Do apologise about that. Yeah, basically, I'm very impressed with the efforts being made, particularly yourself, Chair, but the Freeport's effort. And if you look at the risk implications, it's very, very clear that, you know, if we vote against this, then Hartlepool's left out. So it's very, very clear to me that we have to support this in order to bring about the regeneration of the local economy, bearing in mind the terrible year that we've had. So well done to both yourself and Denise in this.
Thank you, Councillor Tennant. Councillor Harrison.
Thanks, Chair. I just find it a little worrying that the only risk that's pointed out is the fact that if we don't join, we might get left out. Are there any other risks in actually becoming a free port generally? And I do understand the economic uprise of them, but at the same time, wonder if, for example, will the same people be working at the port? Will there be any job losses? Will PD Ports be running it? I mean, I am aware that they're looking at Hartlepool, but I don't think it was just because of the Freeport idea. So I just maybe don't think it's as wonderful as it seems. Sorry.
No, I mean, PD Ports are the owners and operators, and they're also the port authority, so they will still operate the port.
Right.
itself.
Okay.
Really, there is no downside that I've been able to ascertain in going through this process in us being a part of the Freeport. In fact, it's all positive because it ultimately increases the usage of the port. It makes it more viable going forward. There's huge swathes of land within the port that are currently empty, and it all adds incentives to new companies coming in, existing companies expanding, and for PD Ports to grow the bulk operations that they currently have in the port as well. So for me, there are plenty of positives.
So will the same kind of scrutiny be on them as is now?
Yes, so I mean, it would be the Freeport as a whole, the Tees Valley Freeport would have a whole governance structure around it, and that would include local authorities as well. So there is a good amount of scrutiny and checks and balances in place, for want of a better word. But
That's
Denise
right.
might want to come in further.
Thanks for that clarification.
I think just so members aware, when this report was written, we were still sort of working through the bid, and as I said, it is going to Cabinet on the 29th. So the detail of that report has now been worked up, so I can share that with members, so you know that you've got it, because it does go into a lot of detail. You've got custom zones, you've got tax zones, and it's getting your head around it. But every local authority in the Tees Valley will benefit from it. But obviously, if you've got a port, you benefit more on those. The borough and the businesses, so it's really supportive. But I can share that with members, so that they've got that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll just echo some of the comments that Brenda's just made there. And whilst tentatively I will be supporting the proposal, I would welcome some of that detail that Denise has talked about there, and in particular how the economic benefits will filter down into the local communities in our area, and particularly I think some of the communities surrounding the port area in Hartlepool. And I think that's like the crux of the thing, seeing that economic benefit actually come into local communities. And the last thing that I would like to see happening is that the main benefactors are multinational corporations who make use of some of those customs and tax benefits, whilst the local communities actually see no tangible and positive benefits. So I will be giving it my tentative support, but do look forward to that extra information coming through to Denise. And I think it may also be something that we get a more detailed presentation on as things start to flesh out.
Denise, did you want to come back?
Yeah, just obviously that the benefits will be in jobs, because more businesses will come, because they obviously won't have to pay the taxes and the duties and the but I think that's a very good idea. If the combined authority is successful in this competition, then we can ask them to come to a future members seminar and do a presentation on that. So I think that'll be really helpful for the members.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Lindridge.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I support what Denise has said there. I think that it improves the partnership with TVCA. It is important. You know, I know we're only a small authority, but we need to strengthen those relationships. I think there'll be further opportunities to improve our economy and strengthen the job prospects. It raises the profile of Hartlepool significantly, and it'll give us further opportunities in investment. So without knowing all the full details, you know, I'm really pleased with this option, and I'll be supporting it. Thanks, Chair.
That's great. Thank you, members. And can I thank both Denise and Councillor Tennant as well for the kind words. It's been a team effort. We've pushed to make sure Hartlepool has been included, because there is the clear benefits there. And at the same time, the last thing we would want, in the fact that PD Port operate both the Port of Hartlepool and Teesport, is for Teesport to be included, Hartlepool not, and then Hartlepool lose out and not become and become an unviable port. And it's really, really important that we fought our corner on this one and made sure Hartlepool was included within a bid. So I don't think there's any dissent, but the recommendation is that we support the Tees Valley Freeport bid. Any dissent? No? Great. Thank you all very much. I don't have any items for information, and personally, I don't have any other business. I've got, Councillor Brown has his hand up though.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a point that didn't involve any of the points as such, but can I thank the officers, in particular Chris Little, for putting on the seminars surrounding the budget before we had this meeting. As we saw there today, the debate over the budget was immense. We'd probably still be here till tomorrow if we hadn't had many of the questions answered prior to coming to this. So a big thank you. And can I say that going forward over many issues, I think the seminars are a great idea to thrash it out and get people thinking about it long before the vote takes place. Thanks, Chair.
No, thank you, Councillor Brown. You make a really good point, and I think you're right. The increased number of seminars we've had this year have been really helpful, and in a time when we can't meet as regularly as we might like to and kind of have those face-to-face discussions, it's been really good to see and nice to see the members' seminars so well attended too, and so that people feel that whilst not in a decision-making capacity, everybody is being heard. So that's good. Thank you. Right, thank you all very much. We ran over a little bit, but we've all had a good discussion and we've had a good debate. And I thank you all very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day and take care.
Bye then.
Bye. Keep up the